Hey, what is up everybody? Platform Disciple here, and we're continuing our Rebellion set review for the Sleepers and Exiles, which is where we left off last time. And Sleepers is going up first, and this merits some discussion, not because Super Infectious Zombie in particular is a super interesting card or anything, we've actually already talked about it, but because there's only one Sleepers card, and this is the only one. There is No More Heroes is a hybrid card, but the only pure Sleepers card is Super Infectious Zombie. And for players who were not as informed or did not join the Infinity Wars scene until more recently, the Sleepers were actually a faction that was planned on being rotated out, and I don't know if that's still the case or not, but for those of you who play Hearthstone, Pokemon, Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, really anything that has a lot of cards, you may know that there are different formats, and most of these games have a format called Standard, where you only use the cards from the more recent sets. And Infinity Wars had planned to do something similar, where they would, have a standard format, but rather than simply rotating out old cards, they were going to, in addition to rotating out old cards, at least from my understanding, they were going to rotate out factions by not supporting those factions in new sets. So what you would imagine right now is, so let's actually go back in time to Oppression, which came out before this. As you can see, Oppression also didn't really have sleeper cards. So in the past two sets, at least, the Sleepers have been receiving substantially less support than other factions, and that is because they planned on the Sleepers being eliminated entirely from Standard, and you might be playing them in the extended format, whatever that would be. But from my understanding, this is my own personal feeling and what I saw other people reacting. However, I mean, more than anything else, it is my own personal feeling. Rotating out an entire faction feels very, very, very strange, because one of the issues I see is that when people play a card game, and there are different kinds of players that play different ways, but there is definitely a sort of player that clings to a faction or two factions and makes that's like their calling. They play that faction. And you see this in Hearthstone, people play a class, and in this game people play a faction. In like Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic, you don't see it as much. In Pokemon, you might see them play a type of Pokemon. Like they might always be playing a water Pokemon deck. Maybe those are their favorite kind of Pokemon or something like that. But you get the idea. And generally, even when they rotate these kinds of cards in like a standard environment, something like those factions lose some cards, but they get more cards so you can continue to play your favorite faction or character or whatever. But you play it in a new way. But it still is your thing. Like it's your thing. And getting rid of a faction from the theoretically competitive format, I believe they planned on the standard format that was going to lack Sleepers being the like go-to format. That alienates a potentially large group of players, which is very bad in my opinion. I don't know if they plan on bringing Sleepers back or not. Like whether we're gonna see Sleepers actually get rotated out or not, but I do not like the direction they're heading in. The other thing that I would mention is that in addition to them like rotating out sleepers, they would add another faction or something, and then down the line more factions would be rotated in and more factions would be rotated out. And also, from my understanding, Warpath, Genesis, Veror, Flame Dawn, and Descendants of the Dragons are like core factions that would stay around forever. I do not like that. It makes it like I said, it alienates a group of players. One justification they gave for it was they felt that Sleepers of Avarak, they had run out of design space. They had explored the faction as much as they could. But that aggravates me on two different levels. One is there is always more you can explore in a faction, especially a faction around undead characters. They've already got two really cool keywords, Infect and Bloodthirst. They all interact with the graveyard. There's a lot you can do that would, add more to the game for sleepers. Like right off the bat, let me just say that the sleepers have a very unique unlimited character, Endless Horde, and there's a lot of cards that they could make that could really encourage like a actual Endless Horde deck, which you don't really see people using. Like maybe have something that reduces the cost of your Endless Hordes, or something similar to Cyber Infested Dragon that produces more Endless Hordes in your graveyard. But the problem with Cyber Infested Dragon is it just costs so much that they could make more cards like this, is what I'm saying. There's plenty of room to explore in terms of design space still. It would be a long time, in my opinion, before you run out of design space for sleepers. And then the other thing that really aggravates me is they say they run out of design space for sleepers, but it's like, how can you say you've run out of design space for sleepers when like every single Flame Dawn card is a charge minion that is low cost? Like all the relevant cards are low cost charge minions. And how can you say that when Veror, you just give more and more removal? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with giving Flame Dawn charge minions and Veror removal and, Warpath stompy characters and ramp characters and Genesis efficiently costed artificial characters and things like that. There's nothing wrong with that. The point is that you can't come up with a lazy ass excuse like you've run out of ideas for sleepers when there is clearly already a lot of repetition within factions, but that's what gives the factions identities. If I showed you this card Madness and I read you the card text without telling you what faction it belongs to, you would probably be able to guess really, really quickly that it belongs to the Exiles faction. And that shows that there's an identity within the faction, even though Madness doesn't actually really change. It's not like very new for Exiles or something. I don't know. Anyways, let's actually talk about the cards, because that's what we're here to do. I'm done with that rant. We'll have to wait and see what the development team does. I have no idea if or when there would be a next set, so we're just going to leave it for now. All right. Super Infectious Zombie, we've already talked about. Very good stats. He's got Infect. And he also has this extra, you gain control of an opponent's character. If you gain control of them while you have Super Infectious Zombie out, they also gain Infect. Honestly, that effect from my testing has been negligible most of the time, but him being a very well statted Infect character alone makes him pretty solid. He's very decent he's really good in Rift Run, I think, and in Constructed, he has some potential as a command zone card. He's also very low purity, but for triple sleepers, I think it's more effective to run lots of low-cost zombies instead of, having high-cost zombies. This admittedly is not very high cost, but I think sleepers have better options for triple sleepers, and this is more of a splashy card. All right, Defiant Trickster. This is a total goofball card. We've already talked about it. It, I think, has very, very few competitive options because I think I said this in the past, but if you overcharge it, you've gotten rid of a dead card to give your opponent a dead card. It's like it's in its best case scenario, you're trading a dead card to give your opponent a dead card. So I don't know. But what I do want to say is I have seen and have tried playing an Evilly deck that uses the Defiant Trickster card, and it is really fun. It's really interesting. It's a creative deck, and it's not horrible. It's not great, but it's definitely not bad. And that alone, I think, makes the card at least fun, and it's also god awful in Rift Run. I might as well pull that out there. Gravedredge Demon. In Constructed, I think he's generally just too high cost, but he's very good in Rift Run. I like him a lot in Rift Run. It's got decent stats, and the effect is very nice. So it's definitely a very solid Rift Run card. It's not great in Constructed, in my opinion. All right. Now we've got Grimish, and this is a super, super weird, unique one because he's got insanely aggressive stats for his cost. He's got flying, but you straight up lose the game if he dies or changes controller. So if you're using him, you either need to kill your opponent like by turn 5 every time, or you need to be able to get rid of them, or both. And I will throw out there that you can remove him from the game without worrying about him losing you the game. Or you can transform him. So you can use Demonize to get rid of him when you feel he's going to die. And Descent into Madness. Or Dissension. Dissension's a little high cost, but Descent into Madness is a good way to get in some more damage and get rid of him. So I don't know if he's any good. I think he's more of just like a card that challenges you to rethink like how you're gonna play the game. Like he's a card for deck brewers to go wild over. I don't think he's intended to be competitive. I think he's intended to give people a creative outlet to try to build a deck around a very weird wild card. Okay, next we have Ixie, who we've also already talked about, and my opinion has changed somewhat. So I will say that my opinion before was that his effect seems very good, and he's got, he's low cost and good stats. Now my opinion is, yes, he's low cost and has very good stats, so I think he's pretty playable either way, but from my testing, his effect very frequently doesn't even happen. Like your opponent just doesn't draw into him, and so that's pretty much the end of it. Like I haven't seen it happen enough to really care as much about his effect. So it's a cool card and it is a good card, but it's not nearly as impactful of a card as I thought it would be. All right, next up, Lost Knight. I mean, if you get him in Rift Run when you're playing Flamed on Exiles, I think he's okay. But otherwise, like, he's too many resources, and you have to overcharge cards. I think he has no place in Constructed. I don't think he's very good in general. This is a pretty dead card, in my opinion. All right, next, Martyr of Chaos. And I really laid into Z, Martyr of Peace, but I will say that Martyr of Chaos is also a candidate for like a pretty lousy card when you compare it to Martyr of Death and Martyr of Life, which are both, I think, extremely playable by comparison. These two cards, I think, are very competitive, and I've seen people using many copies of Martyr of Life in their deck, which is part of the advantage of that card, is you can actually justify using so many of them. But Martyr of Chaos is a card that you kind of have to already be ahead to be able to play it, because you have to hit turn 10, then you have to be able to play it without worrying about yourself dying or it dying or losing too much board state. And then its effect is extremely devastating, but I think that most of the time that you're able to pull off Martyr of Chaos, you are probably going to win the game anyways, which is my main beef with the card, is that it is a quote-unquote win more card, where if you were already far ahead, it's going to probably seal the deal. But in any other case, it loses a lot of tempo for you. So as of now, I don't think the card's very good, but once again, I can be wrong. Prove me wrong. Get into the game and start playing your Martyr of Chaos deck and change the meta. But if you can't, then it's probably because the card's pretty lousy. All right, Rock Chucker. And Rock Chucker, pretty sweet guy. Low cost, decent stats. So there's already a lot of potential there. And he synergizes very well with other demons. So I think this card is already like, it's very clear what kind of deck you want to use him in, and I think he's very good in the kind of deck you want to use him in. I don't think the demon decks are like very competitive, but this definitely improved the demon decks. The other thing I want to say about the card is that his ability works from the command zone, which is very interesting, because it means you can actually sneak in a lot of really free damage earlier on in the game before these guys get killed, and they probably will get killed because they're low health. They're hard to protect, but yeah, I think the card's pretty good, and it also, like I said, is a pretty solid commander. Okay, Madness, and I briefly mentioned this card before. I didn't talk very much about it, but 1 cost, discard your hand, and at the moment, I think the card is unplayable. It's bad. But that being said, if at any point discarding your hand extremely early on in the game becomes a very large asset, then Madness suddenly is a very good card. However, one thing I will say is that Triple Exiles at least already has access to Cressel, and I think Cressel is extremely powerful, because Cressel, in addition to being a decent actual character, he will force your opponent to discard their hand as well, and that is almost always going to be good, even if you don't have like lots of stuff that synergizes with discarding your hand. So I think Cressel is better almost all the time at the moment. But I will say this is one purity, but I don't know what the use for this card is, and right now I think it's useless, but it is a card that could gain a use when either somebody figures out a broken combo with it, or they release more cards in the future that somehow make the card better. And lastly, we have No More Heroes, which it's an Exiles Sleepers card, and those factions are seen together in the Infested Abomination decks and the Tibat mill decks, the Tibat modifications of those decks. And it just so happens that I think that No More Heroes fits very well into that deck strategy, because it's another board wipe, basically. I think that against certain factions, it's extremely powerful. Certain decks, it's extremely powerful. Like against Overseers in particular. Overseers has so many unique characters with their champions. It also hits command zones, which is very important. So it's a decent sideboard card, but I think it's also just a very decent card to have in Infested Abomination decks, even in the main deck or in the Tibat Infested Abomination mill decks. I'm using it in mine. I had Winds of War in there before. and Winds of War was a very weak card, and I felt that almost all the time I didn't want to have Winds of War in my hand, whereas No More Heroes, admittedly, there are some matchups where it does very little, but in the matchups where it matters, it's extremely powerful. And in the matchups where it doesn't matter, most of the time you can actually just deal with having the dead card in the Infested Abomination decks, because those decks have access to so much board wipe and removal and stall cards already. And then you just sideboard them out. So I think the card's pretty solid. And that is all of the Exiles cards and the unfortunate one Sleepers card. And in the next video, we are going to finish everything up, and we're going to do Overseers and the Factionless cards. See you then.